Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Thank you for joining us here at Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast that prides itself on being just a little bit different and looking in the different corners of the Star Wars galaxy than your typical Star Wars show. I am Jedi Master John Mills, your humble host on this journey, and with me, as always, is my friend Jedi Master Matthew Rushing, my eternal compatriot on this journey through a galaxy far, far away. Matt, how are you today? How are things going? What's going on in the Star Wars universe with you?
You know what? Things are going pretty well. It's been busy here at the old Rushing-vania, taking off of the Kesselvania, not the same. It's been good. Got a new job, so I've been working on that, and it's just been very busy. Another year older, and so, yes, things are going well. How about you?
Oh, just fine. I'm drawing up a lawsuit right here, suing for the use of Vania in naming your kingdom. Castlevania
yeah,
does
I'm
not
sorry,
take
I
well.
didn't know that you had that, trademarked. My bad.
Our first move is legal, and then immediately after the filing, we start bombing. But perhaps I get ahead of myself, but I don't want to get ahead.
Legal?
I will make it legal. I don't want to get ahead of myself, though. Of course, if you're here, you're listening to the show. Thank you for listening. Thank you, if this is your first time, to whomever pointed you in our direction. We truly, truly appreciate it. And you can reach out to us at thenerdparty.com/contact. You can go ahead and reach out to us on the social medias at the Jedi Masters on Twitter. And you can reach out to the network as a whole at Join Nerd Party on Twitter, or look for the Nerd Party on Facebook and Instagram. And another great way to get in contact with us is to leave us a star rating and review on
That's right.
Apple Podcasts. And we recently got a review.
We did from Red_5s. They said, the best Star Wars podcast, ! 5 stars. They said, I've subscribed and unsubscribed from many Star Wars podcasts over the years for various reasons, mostly because of fandom drama or real-world politics being brought in. This is one of the only ones that's remained consistent and is a must-listen for me. They stick to Star Wars and have great in-depth conversations and don't shy away from sharing their opinions, whether they're positive or negative. They never come across as being overly critical or negative, but they also don't give everything a glowing review simply because it's Star Wars. I highly recommend them to all Star Wars fans.
I'm walking on sunshine with a review like that. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Red_5s. Whoever you may be, you made our day with a review like that. It really means a lot. So thank you so much. And if you want to be like Red_5s, go ahead and drop us a star rating and review. It doesn't have to be on Apple Podcasts. It can be on your podcatcher of choice. However, Apple Podcasts, we get alerts. And so we might not see other ones that are out there because, I mean, let's face it, Apple sort of cornered the market on that sort of thing. We also did get an email from Jeff, who inspired our previous conversation, thanking us for covering it, and similarly saying that he really appreciated our efforts on the show. So it means a lot. Matt and I don't make money. You don't make money at this, Matt, right? You're not holding out on me?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, if I was, maybe it's banking somewhere and I don't really know it.
You know what? This sounds like the plot of a movie where we could go out and find a... Do they have Bitcoin vaults? Let's go find a Bitcoin vault. Let's just say they exist. Why not? You jump in, it's like Scrooge McDuck. It's all holographic money. But another interesting thing here is that you, Matt, have a topic that you wanted to throw out there, and I think it's really interesting. I think it's very much worth talking about.
You.
And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start the spark of rebellion here, so that I'm going to put it out there, and then you can take charge from there. You wanted to talk about different storylines that you think would be interesting to see set during the Clone Wars. Now, we've got The Bad Batch, which we love, which is a terrific Star Wars show. We absolutely love it. We are huge fans of the show. And I can say that this is very intriguing to me because it's caught me a little flat-footed. So why don't you take the reins from this point on here and explain to me what your thinking is?
So, obviously, we know that there were still stories in the Clone Wars that they were wanting to do and they did not get a chance to do. And, just simply, first, I think the story that comes to mind that I would love to have seen, and I would still actually love to see them do, maybe in a 2-hour movie format, on Disney Plus. Because they're still making The Bad Batch, so they're working within the Clone Wars format, right? They of course they did the final season as well, so they have the ability to be able to do this. I would really love to see the Dark Disciple storyline, because that's one. Obviously, they did it in a novel form, but it was such a pivotal moment. And, obviously it brought to conclusion one of the main characters from the Clone Wars era, which was Asajj Ventress. And, we've talked about this behind the scenes with our good friend Nick Anastasio, who's, now working on The Bad Batch. He had helped with the last season of the Clone Wars, and of course worked on the Clone Wars as well as the prequels. And, he's been in ILM. So the whole idea of, he's mentioned, Asajj Ventress was always this kind of mirror for Ahsoka in her storyline. And, I think, what us having gotten to kind of get to the finale for Ahsoka in the Clone Wars, it would be really nice to see the finale basically for this other character who came so far, and, this is an area where, too, as much as I absolutely adore Christy Golden's book, you can always make a few minor changes here and there, if you need to. So that's one of the stories that kind of comes to mind, obviously, right from the start when I think, there are still stories you could tell in the Clone Wars era, which I would think would be phenomenal.
Okay. I accept your premise. But because this is aggressive negotiations, I'm going to come at you from a different angle here. And I'm going to throw the question out there that I think is probably sitting in everybody's mind. First and foremost, let me just get out of the way. I love Dark Disciple. I think it's a terrific book. I would watch the hell out of a 2-hour arc if they wanted to do that with it. Absolutely. I think both would be valid. Just do an adaptation. I'm on board, however you want to do it. That being said, how would you respond to somebody who hears this topic and even our glowing review of Dark Disciple and the desire to see Asajj Ventress wrap up her arc? How would you respond to somebody that says, well, the Clone Wars is over. We've moved past it. We've got different properties now. Why would we want to go back and reopen that? It finished so incredibly strong with that final arc. Why would you want to open that back up?
This kind of reminds me of how you have tie-in fiction, and it tells stories between other stories. And I guess in many ways, that's kind of my idea. And in fact, you had that season of the Clone Wars that was called The Lost Missions. I think this could legitimately be the lost missions, the stories that didn't get told but still have an impact. Because the other story that I'm kind of thinking of that came to mind and kind of spurred this in my mind is in The Bad Batch, we saw Kanan with his and Caleb Dune with his master Depa Billaba. Now, from some canon sources, we know Depa Billaba had a time period in which things did not go very well for her, and she kind of had to be rehabilitated. That's another story that I think would be so phenomenal to see, especially when we think of how it connects with the story of Caleb Dune / Kanan Jarrus, and what it does for that. So I feel like, the reason I would argue that stories like this could still be told and still would be worthwhile is that they can still add so much to the mythology and the tapestry of the Clone Wars era, not only just for the Clone Wars era, but even for what comes afterwards.
Simply because I want to be combative. I'm not going to let go of this one that easily, just because I want to be this way. What then would you say? Well, there are a lot of story elements that have been discarded all the way back to the original trilogy, where Lucas said, I just can't get to this. I just can't make this fit. Oh, I got to table this. Some of that came back in the prequels, and some of that was all stuff that he held on to for all of those years. What would you say to somebody that says, you know what, we don't need necessarily this specific arc brought back? How would you respond to somebody saying, well, why don't we just repurpose Depa Biloba's arc and give it to somebody else? Why don't we just use that as an inspiration point and consider it one of those ideas that we're attached to, but we just can't do what we wanted to do with it?
Yeah, that is, I think, an interesting question. I think that the storylines here with the Clone Wars and it being such a rich era, and I think the biggest reason for this being something that would make sense is because the Clone Wars itself, when it came out, was asynchronous. There were stories that got told, and then we went back and told other stories, and so there is a sense in which we've already seen that happen. And so by going back and doing this almost like movie of the week, movie of the month, kind of thing with these Clone Wars arcs, it gives you the opportunity to still explore a very rich era of Star Wars and still add to things. And, hey, we can always get the mighty holocron reminding us of the chronological order that you can watch things in, which is fantastic too. So, I think that this still has some serious legitimacy for opportunities of stories that we haven't gotten to see. Obviously things can be repurposed and used later on in different eras, but I think that there are stories to which are quite specific to the Clone Wars era that would work best in that era.
Absolutely. And I don't discount that at all. Like I said, I'm sort of holding on to this just because I think that this is a really interesting thing to push at. Because I think that what you're hitting on here, this idea of almost like a movie of the week sort of thing, sort of what they were trying to do with the Ewok Adventures, where it was you would just have this movie of the week thing come up, and it doesn't really matter where it fits in. It's just a story that you're going to tell that happens at a certain time period. So maybe this would even be opening the doorway to having Star Wars stories in different eras show up with, and there's a slightly less, there's a slightly smaller sense of risk with something like this, I would say, because you can't quote unquote damage the brand with something that people are coming at mentally like that.
Sure.
Because I think the whole thing that probably, and I'm trying to give voice to, even if it's just one person listening right now, I'm trying just to give voice to that person who says, let me draw an analogy or an analogy, metaphor, whatever. What does it matter? Let me draw a comparison. Tom Petty's album Wildflowers is an absolute masterpiece. It is one of my favorite albums of all time. I think it's absolutely unassailably a classic. There isn't a single song on it that I think is bad. And that is something, albums don't really exist anymore as a concept so much as an anachronism in the current marketplace. Sure. But that is definitely an album where I think this is a perfect snapshot in time of an artist at the absolute top of their game. Now, they released an expanded version of Wildflowers with an extra disc and all of these behind-the-scenes recordings and everything like that. And I have not listened to it yet. And the reason I have not listened to it is because no matter how good that second album of material, or I think they have like a 5-disc set with all of the stuff where it's like they messed up halfway through and restarted or something like that. The Doors have done this too, which, it's interesting to listen to from a certain perspective, but I have not listened to this extended version of Tom Petty's Wildflowers specifically because emotionally that door closed for me.
Sure.
And so I just consider it's such a dicey proposition. They ended the Clone Wars, and it was presented as an ending to the Clone Wars. And so I think that's the emotional proposition that you have to try to get past people. And as much as I love this Asajj Ventress idea, and as much as I would be very intrigued in the Depa Billaba idea, how would you overcome that? What would one of those be the first storyline that you would throw at an audience to break through that emotional reticence? Or is there another one you have in the back of your mind that you would like to see them? Is there an original one that you have in the back of your mind where you say, this is what would break through. This is what would make people want to watch?
I think I would go with the Asajj Ventress story to pull you back in because she's such a beloved character. It would be so easy for people to be pulled in and excited about that. But another thing that I thought would be really interesting would the Outer Rim sieges and getting to see connected with that, then Boss Pity, and Master Voss. Because that's after this has happened with Asajj Ventress. So seeing his progression then as a character and how he's kind of like been able to work through the pain of that. You could get great characters like, Aayla Secura to be able to show up again because, that's his Padawan and, have her maybe be there at the beginning because, he's still maybe working through some things and then, she goes to Felucia and, so like, I think that would also be a great idea because you could add to a lot of these different Jedi that we really haven't gotten to spend a ton of time with and give them a more fleshed out character, I especially think too, Quinlan Voss is a character to which so many people love too in fandom. So kind of seeing that progression, it connects with the Asajj Ventress story, but it also gives us opportunity to really love more of the characters we love.
See, I would almost pitch then, I would throw an idea out there to you that maybe the way to approach this would be as a combination, throw it in a blender, almost have a Kung Fu style series where you have Quinlan Voss. And because he's on the Outer Rim, have him survive, but have him proceed into the unknown regions so that we're like the Thrawn books that we love so much that Timothy Zahn is coming out with right now. We've got Star Wars, but it's in an unfamiliar environment. It's not Empire. It's not Rebellion. It's not any of that, but it's still set in that galaxy. And then we get flashbacks to those stories. So almost like the framing device is Master Voss going through sort of the way that Kanan does, but we get flashbacks to the stories that he was a part of or that he knows or something like that.
Well, I think, another one that just came to mind too is like this gives you an opportunity to add to the Maul storyline. And him creating or maybe laying the foundation for Crimson Dawn, too. Because, again, that's another huge storyline to which we never got to see any more of, unfortunately, because, the series ended. And we know that that's what comes to fruition for him in Solo, but we never get an opportunity to see that again.
Now, see, that is one I can definitely get on board with, that is going to be set during the Clone Wars and seeing Maul at work with that. And then you still have the potential to go beyond the end of the Clone Wars. And so it becomes, I think, Clone Wars adjacent as opposed to a Clone Wars storyline sort of thing. Yep. And so I think that has a tremendous amount of potential because, again, I mean, it would bring us back again to this idea of Star Wars Underworld, which we keep having almost breaking into that area of Star Wars, the game that almost happened, Solo opening the doorway to that, and then the end of the Clone Wars hinting at those sorts of things. I think that winds up giving us our doorway into an Underworld series that is Clone Wars adjacent. So we're back in that time period, but we're focused on a completely different sort of Star Wars than we're used to. I think that's a tremendous idea right there, to focus on that. And the thing is, I know that it seems I'm pushing back, and it's not that I'm pushing back on the idea. It's just an acknowledgement of that reticence, because there are things that I would love to see set during the Clone Wars era that I both want to see and don't want to see, because the first thing that would pop to my mind would be, how did Anakin get his scar? But then there's a part of me that doesn't want to know. We've talked about it in a past episode. Once you get to 260, you have a lot of past episodes. We talked about our theories about how that happened, and I have it in my head. And so there again runs that whole risk of, I'm happy with the story I have in my head, and let me just run forward with that. But at the same time, I would be trusting of this creative team to give me a story that would be very interesting about why it would happen.
You know, I think the thing about this idea that, you know, and obviously who knows if it would ever happen, but it just came to mind because, you know, one of the beauties of the Clone Wars was the depth and the places that it gave us to explore. And, you know, knowing even like the crazy idea that they were going to have a story that involved the Yuuzhan Vong somehow. Who knows what they would have done with that? But even just that thought process is exciting, you know, and interesting, because obviously, you know, Dave was not above, you know, and George were not above using things that they knew from the EU, but then they made it their own, the way they did with the Mandalorians. And so, you know, something like that too, to me, telling that kind of story as well also adds to all the things you've got going on in the unknown regions with the Chiss ascendancy, all this kind of stuff. And I think it just enriches the Star Wars galaxy to continue to kind of push those type of boundaries where as Star Wars tries to grow and maybe tries to find, you know, new story element ideas, that gives us some elements to work with.
See, I would almost run with that and have a short run series, a mini series, if you would, that's set during the Clone Wars with something. It doesn't necessarily need to be the Vong, but something similar to that, where it is an extragalactic species. And during the Clone Wars, we see things from their perspective, stuff that's going on, and they're probing and they're doing research, and they say, okay, great. We've figured them out. The galaxy is in turmoil. Now's the time to make our move. And I know there are going to be people that roll their eyes so badly that they're going to do a full 360, and it's going to be very disorienting. But I would be the type of person that would love to have it be that they show up with their planned quote unquote invasion move, the tip of the spear, if you will, and they accidentally show up during something, not necessarily this, but something like the Battle of Coruscant, where they show up right at the climactic battle. And so they just choose the absolute wrong moment. And so the reason we never heard of them and the reason they never took everything over is they thought it was the perfect time to go and storm Coruscant, and we'll take over the Republic, and that'll enable us. Oh no, everybody's already here. And they just get wiped out in the process, caught between the great warships of the Republic and the Separatist fleets. Just throwing it out there.
I mean, I think the other thing that does kind of excite me with this opportunity, is this era is so rich with being able to explore characters to which we've seen on screen, but we haven't gotten an opportunity to really spend a ton of time with. And, I think that's the thing that to me would be really exciting is to see more of some of these Jedi, give them personality, and I think that was the joy of the Clone Wars in general, was just that, but when you watch episode 3 and you get to the scene where they're all being wiped out, it's so much more memorable because you've spent time with many of them. And, you can remember those episodes, whether you liked them in those episodes or you disliked them in those episodes. It brings more to mind. And so I think the reason for kind of thinking about this is that Star Wars animation is just so rich. And it's added so much to the Star Wars mythos in general, and specifically the Clone Wars. And of course, now the Bad Batch doing that. Rebels has done that as well. And so I think what I would be most excited with is seeing Star Wars animation continue. And this, I feel like, would be a fantastic way for it to do so. And in many ways, an easy way for them to do, since, they've been working on the final season and, of course, now the Bad Batch. And so you have that production line to be able to do this. And, again, doing a hour-and-a-half movie or whatever of major storylines that never got touched would be really fascinating. And to which, look, you'll never really tell this story probably anywhere else. And so, again, it just gives you great content for, and a great return, I think, with fans. So
I agree. I think also you could have a tremendous opportunity to, and what's surprising to me is in this streaming environment that they haven't pieced together, that we're basically back to television networks, you could have something where you say, okay, at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, whatever, or 9 p.m. and et cetera, you have a unified premiere event.
Sure.
Where you say this is premiering and you present it like it doesn't just drop, it's a production.
Right.
And you say, everybody tune in, sit down, try to get that communal watch experience going for everybody. And yes, I think that animation is something that, and I just want to clarify, I know that you clarified that you don't mean easy as in it's easy to do, but the production,
right.
But the ramp up pre-production demands are lower when you're dealing with an era for which you already have the assets.
Right.
So,
exactly.
So you don't have to spend
which is what
all
Bad
of that.
Batch is,
Right.
is actually, they've got all those assets, previously, and that is probably helping out that show be able to do some pretty big episodes, whereas, in Rebels, it took them a little bit longer to do that because they were having to create new assets, and it takes a while to be able to do that. Costs money to build these assets digitally.
And in a different style at that.
Exactly.
So, yeah. I know I seemed combative earlier in a way, but I just wanted to just sort of give voice to that. And I think that everybody should be convinced at this point that there is a way to do this. It doesn't have to be a series. It can be.
Yes.
I think that you've hit on it here, that it doesn't have to be a series. It can be movies, short 90-minute movies if you want to. And that, I think, is a tremendously good path forward for that.
And before we end, John, I just have to mention, I think the one story that's on everybody's mind, which is how Jar Jar Binks was pivotal to the creation of the rebellion. I need that story. And
I'd love that story.
Yeah.
I would love that story specifically because I think that everybody loves to throw around the term subverting expectations, but I think that having Jar Jar be responsible for the creation of the Empire, in essence, and then have him be in some way integral to the creation of the rebellion, would actually play into that whole idea, that theme of balance. Of you can never adequately predict whose actions are going to have the greater consequences. And the fact that Jar Jar took so much heat as a character, making him pivotal at those different moments, I think is the most elegant way to diffuse the haters, as it were, by making him integral to the story. I'm on board with this.
Yeah.
So
let's do it.
So you've convinced me, but you probably haven't convinced everybody. If there's somebody that needs some additional convincing and they want to come to you to talk about it, where can they find you online?
Oh, of course. The best place to go is Matt Rushing 02. I'm all over social media platforms with that name. So I hope you'll check me out there. Of course, you can also find me here on the network. I did Owl Post with Drea Coffin, where he talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. So if you love Harry Potter, which if you don't, I don't know why you don't, and we should talk you into that. So go over to Owl Post and check that out. And then, of course, I'm over on the TFM network doing a bunch of shows. I'm doing Literary Treks as well as The Orb over there. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And, of course, last but not least, doing the 602 Club, which is our general geek show, talking about all of the fandoms we love. So if you like just about any fandom, that is the place to be. And, of course, in that same feed, you can find John Mills and I talking about Snyder Cuts, which is everything that Zack Snyder has directed. And that was a ton of fun, and I hope you'll join us there as well. John, if people do want to catch up with you, where can they also find you, my friend?
You can find me online as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE. I encourage everybody to connect with me over on Letterboxd because I watch a lot of movies, and I love to write pithy reviews and try to make them funny. You can also find me here on the network, co-hosting House Lights, a show where we look at the works of directors, the complete body of work or complete body of work from a certain time period from beginning to finish. You can find me over on Snyder Cuts over on the 602 Club feed, and I'm very much looking forward to our quasi-secret project that'll be coming out later in the year on that feed as well. So let's just say we're assembling a pretty interesting idea. But with all of that said, I think we need to get back to the Jedi Temple and pitch all of these ideas to the Jedi TV production team. So, Master Rushing, I think it's time to close these negotiations.
John, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.